There's a sentence that gets said in almost every strategic meeting I've ever been in. It sounds responsible, careful. In certain circumstances, it might even sound wise. That sentence is, we need more data before we decide. Today, I want to pull that sentence apart because most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it isn't a statement about information. It's a statement about discomfort. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a team that makes good decisions under pressure and the one that drifts to outcomes it never consciously chose. I am Maria Boicova-Wynants, and this is What Would You Do? This episode is about something that runs underneath every episode that we've done so far: the discipline of deciding when you can't see clearly. In IP, in strategy, in any situation that actually has stakes. Because here's the reality. At some point in every significant, let's say, IP decision, a filing, a market entry, a partnership, a pricing move, a pivot, you will not have complete information. You will not have certainty, and you will still have to decide. Not eventually, now. The question is not how to get to certainty. Just accept it, you won't, ever. The question is how to decide well without it. The wrong instinct here is so well disguised that it deserves its own category. Because unlike most of the wrong instincts we've already talked about in this series, like the panic, the overcaution, the reactive move, this one wears the costume of rigor. More analysis, another round of research, a wider landscape scan, another expert opinion, or even a working group to synthesize all the findings. All of that sounds like good process. And the funny thing is, sometimes it is. Sometimes you are genuinely missing information that exists, that is retrievable, and importantly, that would change the decision in a meaningful way. In those cases, gather it, obviously. But that's not the typical situation. The typical situation is that you have already gathered substantial information and the decision is still uncomfortable. The whole we need more data type of a sentiment is just a socially acceptable way of saying, I don't want to be the person who makes this call and who turns out to be wrong. That's a human response. But that's not a strategic one. Because here is what waiting actually does mechanically to a decision. It doesn't hold the situation still while you collect more information. The situation keeps moving. Competitors are making decisions, you are deferring. Market windows are opening and closing on their own timeline. Filing deadlines are running. Partnership terms are firming up on the other side of a table when someone is deciding whether you are serious. Waiting feels like a pause, but it isn't. It's a drift. And drift, as I've said before in this series, is not the absence of a decision. It's a decision made by default with no ownership and no clarity about what you were trading away. Let me give you the precise diagnosis of what's happening when a team gets stuck in the whole we need more data loop. They're treating uncertainty as an information problem when it's actually a decision design problem. An information problem has a solution. Find the missing information and the decision becomes clear. That is the model most of us were trained on. That's how school works. There is the right answer, and if you study enough, you will find it. A decision design problem, it's different. The information doesn't exist yet, or it isn't accessible by default, or It wouldn't change the fundamental trade-offs, even if you had that information. The uncertainty is structural. It's not the gap, it's the whole terrain. And that situation, in this one, gathering more information doesn't help. It just delays, it consumes resources. It sometimes even makes things worse because it generates more data points to disagree about, more angles to consider, more reasons to defer. What actually resolves a decision design problem is not more information, it's better framing. Specifically, shifting from what do we know, which is always by definition incomplete, to what must be true for this to work. This is a different question, a harder question, but one you can actually answer with the information that you already have. If we file this patent now, what must be true for it to matter in 3 years? If we delay, what must be true for that delay not to cost us something irreversible? If we enter this market, what must be true about the competitive dynamics for us to have a viable position? Each of those questions produces a concrete assumption. And assumptions can be tested, weighed, and tracked, even when the future can't be known. That's the shift. From the unanswerable question, do we have enough information, to the operational one, what must be true and how confident are we that it is? When teams stay in the more data loop too long, 3 specific things get lost. And I want to name them precisely because each one has a different recovery cost. The first one is timing. Certain options are available in time T and not at time T plus 6 months, like filing windows, market entry moments, partnership terms before someone else locks them, acquisition conversations before a competitor does the deal instead. These are not recoverable. Once the window closes, it closes. And no amount of superior analysis after the fact changes what was available before it. The second one is positioning. Every month you spend not deciding is a month in which the market is forming impressions of who you are and what you stand for without your input. Your competitors are filing, launching, partnering, and creating facts. You are creating none. And in markets, facts accumulate into narratives, and narratives become very hard to revise once they've set. The third, and this one is probably the most insidious, is decision capacity. Every decision that gets deferred takes up cognitive and organizational space. It sits on the agenda. It resurfaces from time to time. It requires rebriefing once you get to it again. The team that has 20 unresolved decisions in the orbit is not operating at full capacity on anything. The cost of deferred decisions is not just the decisions themselves, it's the drag that they create on everything else. Most organizations dramatically underestimate this third cost. They account for the first two, for the timing, the positioning, as strategic risks. And they almost never account for the organizational overhead of sustained indecision. But I've watched it slow down companies in so many ways that were genuinely more damaging than any single bad decision would have ever been. So what would I do? First of all, I would push the decision into the open, like literally on a page or a whiteboard or a shared document, just wherever your team thinks. That with 3 columns. What must be true for this decision to work? What we currently know or what we believe about each of those things? And what we genuinely don't know, and whether that unknown is resolvable before the decision needs to be made. And the thing is, that third column, it's a diagnostic. If the unknowns are resolvable, if there is specific information that exists and can be obtained in a reasonable time frame and would meaningfully change the answer, as I said it already, go get it. That's legitimate. But if the unknowns are structural, if they are about the future or about the competitor's behavior in the market or the market itself that hasn't formed yet, then you're not waiting for information. You are waiting for certainty. And certainty will not come. That's a different problem entirely. Second, I would define a confidence threshold, not a perfection threshold. What level of confidence is sufficient for us to move? 70%? 60%? The number is in fact less important than the whole act of naming it, because naming it forces the team to confront two things. First, how confident they are actually right now. And second, what specifically would need to be true to get them to that threshold. This also changes the conversation when someone says, we need more data. The response is no longer a vague disagreement. It's a specific question. What data and how much does it shift our confidence? And by when can we have it? That's already a tractable conversation. We need more data. Without that structure, it's not. Third step, I would define a decision deadline, a real one, with a date, not a condition. Not like whole, we'll decide when we have more information. When specifically? And on that date, with whatever information is available, a decision gets made. Because the alternative, all those conditional deadlines tied to information states that may never arrive, is just indefinite deferral with a bit of a better grammar. The deadline has a second function beyond forcing a resolution. It changes how team gathers information in the interim. When there's no deadline, information gathering meanders. When there's a date, people become very focused on what actually moves the needle versus what is merely interesting. That focus alone often serves as the key assumptions faster than any amount of open-ended research. Fourth, and this is probably the most important move, I would separate the decision from its outcome in advance. A good decision made with incomplete information can still produce a bad outcome. A bad decision made with incomplete information can still produce a good one. Outcome and decision quality are not the same thing. And conflating them is what makes people afraid to decide under uncertainty in the first place. If the team understands explicitly before the decision that they are being evaluated on the quality of reasoning, not on whether the outcome validates this reasoning, the decision-making dynamic changes completely. People become willing to commit, to name their assumptions, to take a position. That psychological shift is not soft. That's a structural condition under which good decisions actually get made. Without it, every high-stakes decision under uncertainty becomes a political negotiation about who is going to be blamed if it goes wrong. And that negotiation produces terrible decisions consistently. The biggest risk in a decision made under uncertainty is not making the wrong call. I want to say that again, because it's one of those things almost everyone in high-stakes meetings believes in reverse. The biggest risk is not making the wrong call. It's drifting into one, passively, incrementally, without anyone's name on it, while the team tells itself it's being careful. That is how most strategic failures happen. Not through bold mistakes that could have been caught with better analysis, through passive ones, through the slow accumulation of deferred decisions, each of which seemed reasonable to postpone, until the sum of all that postponement becomes a position you didn't choose and can't easily reverse. Uncertainty, it's not a problem. It's the condition, the permanent, inescapable condition of every decision that actually matters. And the question is not whether you can eliminate it. You can't. The question is whether you have the structure and the nerve to decide inside it. So next time someone says to you that we need more data, ask the actual question. Do we need more data? Or are we avoiding the decision? The answer to that question tells you more about the health of your organization than any data set will. Thank you very much for listening to What Would You Do? In the next episode, let's address the question of what would you do if legal advice conflicts with business strategy? Because deciding under uncertainty is already hard enough when all those signals are ambiguous. But it gets considerably harder when the people advising you are pulling in opposite directions. That tension and what to do inside it is exactly what we're going to take apart next. Until then, think clearly, decide better.